Now, it's important to understand what I'm going to tell you next in order to make a couple of connections to ancient Egypt and the Hebrew tradition and also Christianity. In the biblical account of Joseph, Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zeph-nah-pa-aniyah, and this gives it all away. Now, Joseph and Yuya are composite names, Yu and Seth for Joseph, and Yu and Yah for Yuya. The first part of this name, that is Zeph-nah-pa-aniyah, is Seth, which is not a Hebrew name. Now, when you combine Yu with the first part of the vizier's name, that is Seth, you have Joseph. This is too much of a coincidence to be ignored. Now, Pharaoh also gave Joseph a wife, and her name is Asneth. Yuya's real wife's name, by the way, was Tuya, and I'll explain the importance of this in a moment. The word Nath in both names is Neith, a goddess with a shrine at Sais in the delta area of Egypt, where the Israelites lived for a long time. Neith's determinative is a shield with crossed arrows and the bee. Now, understand this. The determinative for St. Peter of Christian fame is crossed keys on a shield and bees, as we can see in this slide taken by the author at St. Peter's Basilica in July of 2001. Do you think there is a connection between St. Peter and Neith? Well, here it is. You can get quite a buzz from cannabis, which the Egyptians most certainly grew for making rope, medicines, and ritual purposes. Bees love hemp, and the resin loaded with THC sticks to their hairs, which they bring back to the hive and incorporate into their honey. St. Peter has the keys to heaven's gate. So do the bees. That is THC. I hope you're following me on this. There's a great deal of literature written by very intelligent people on this subject, much of which has been ignored by the biblical scholars and those who write textbooks for our high schools and colleges and universities. And you don't have to think too deeply to understand why it is this has been disregarded. Now, you can ignore the connection between the mythic hero Joseph and Yuya if you like, but ask yourself this question. Is it possible that the biblical scholars, Catholic priests, and rabbis have really missed these connections? No, they haven't. However, out of political correctness, perhaps to continue their academic standing and keep the churches and temples open, they have chosen to maintain myths as historical truth that fit another people in another place belonging to a period 2,500 years distant from us. To report these players in the Old Testament as fact is nothing less than a big fat, now let me rephrase that, a large obese lie. But let me take this story of Joseph a step further. We know that a tribe of Canaanite people from Palestine called the Hyksos, but also called Asiatics by the Egyptians, but better known as the Hyksos from the Greek rendering, conquered the delta area of Egypt and ruled in that area during the 15th dynasty. That would be around 1650 through 1505 BCE. Their temples, metalwork, and pottery were a mixture of Canaanite and Egyptian traditions. They were eventually driven out of the delta area by the Egyptian kings of the 17th and 18th dynasties. Again, around 1505, most have been driven out of the delta area and pursued into Palestine. Now here's the point. The Hyksos may have been the Hebrews who conquered the delta area. Now, being driven out, does it sound like an exodus? Well, it's one of them. Yuya, whose birth date is around 1400 BCE, may in fact have been a descendant of the Hyksos, whose lineage may have held rather important government offices. Again, Joseph is probably based on the life of Yuya, who was vizier to both Thutmose IV and Amenhotep III. Now, get this. Yuya and Tuya have a daughter named Tai. She is married to Amenhotep III and becomes his great wife, of which you can only have one. Amenhotep III, who is probably Solomon in the Bible, also raises his eldest daughter, or perhaps half-sister, Cinnamon, to the same title as Tai, that is, king's great wife. Now let's make a connection. Again, Amenhotep III may be the historical Solomon in the Bible. There are so many similarities between them, there has to be some sort of connection. They're both involved in building bureaucracies, taxation, building monuments, and sites of fortification. Both were said to be wise, and the story about Solomon determining the biological mother of a child by judging the child be torn in half, with half given to each, is the same story as Amenhotep having to make a choice as to who should be his great wife, Cinnamon or Tai. He's the one who's really torn apart. Now, Queen Mother Tai is in trouble here because in all likelihood she's part Hebrew and part Egyptian. And so Tai's bloodline is questionable and thus is not as close as Cinnamon's. Tai and Amenhotep have a son, and Cinnamon has sons. Now, the killing of the firstborn as a punishment in the Bible, that is Exodus 13, 14 through 16, might represent the killing of only one, the son of Amenhotep and Tai, and his name is Amenhotep IV. Tai seems to already have lost one son. He's there in the records one moment and gone the next. This is suggested in the Hebrew Talmud, a work analyzing the books of the Bible. So, to protect her second son, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, Tai sends him by water to her relations in nearby Goshen. Now, there's another story that would have been available to the Hebrews when they were exiled to Babylon in 586. And this is in regards to the life of Sargon the Great, an Akkadian emperor famous for his conquest of the Sumerian city-states in the 23rd and 22nd centuries BCE. Let me read you his story. Sargon am I, the mighty king, monarch of Agad. My mother was of lowly birth, my father I knew not. The brother of my father is a mountain dweller, and my city, Azaparanu, lies on the banks of the Euphrates. My lowly mother conceived and bore me in secrecy, placed me in a basket of rushes, sealed it with bitumen, and set me in the river, which, however, did not engulf me. The river bore me up. And it carried me to Aku, the irrigator, who took me from the river, raised me as his son, and made of me a gardener. And while I was a gardener, the goddess Ishtar loved me. Then I ruled the kingdom. In the next presentation, I will reveal to you the identity of Moses.